Okay, I have 11:32 on my clock, so we're going to go ahead and get going. My name is Nicole Daringer from Boundary Systems, and thanks for joining our weekly webinar series. Always be sure to check our website at boundarysys.com for a list of upcoming topics or visit our YouTube channel to see the ones we've already covered. Today's presenter is our technical specialist, Sevi Beaver, and he will be presenting Creo license borrowing, a few housekeeping items. Participants will be in listen-only mode. Sevi welcomes questions about his presentation, but please use the GoToWebinar questions panel to submit them, and he will address them at the end. And with that, I'm going to turn it right over to Sevi.
Thanks so much, Nicole. Hello, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Sevi Beaver, and I'm going to be talking today about license borrowing in Creo. So a little agenda today of our webinar. First, I'm just going to give an introduction to Boundary Systems and myself before jumping into an overview about license borrowing, talk about what it can be used for, what it is, that kind of thing. And lastly, I'll demonstrate exactly how it works. It's really simple. So I'm going to show that. So first of all, my name is Sevi Beaver. Technical specialist at Boundary Systems, specialize in CAD software. I've been working with various CAD software, Creo among others, for about 7 years, and recently been getting into the world of tech pubs as well. Boundary Systems is a everything PTC partner, as well as actually a partner with some other companies such as Etraj and Moldex 3D. We are in the PDS Vision group of global companies as well, and we mostly have to do with, as I mentioned, everything related to PTC products, whether product lifecycle management, data management, et cetera, et cetera. Additionally, we are an authorized training partner. We offer training for classes for Creo, Windchill, MathCAD, ArborText, and among others. All right, so jumping into the topic of the webinar today, license borrowing. So first, a brief overview of how Creo licenses work. If you'd like a more detailed explanation of the license process, then you can find a great video by Michael Wimberly on our YouTube channel. So I'm going to keep it a little bit brief today. But essentially, each user of Creo needs to have a license, or they will be unable to open and run Creo. These licenses mostly come in two forms, either locked licenses, which are locked specifically to a user computer, or floating licenses. And floating licenses are essentially just available for anyone on the network to use. When someone uses them, that particular license goes from available to in use. It is no longer available. And when the user stops using Creo, the license goes back to available. So what license borrowing allows you to do is take one of those floating licenses and borrow it to your specific computer so that you're able to use it when you're not connected to the network. So the potential uses of this, number one, working from home. If you currently need to connect to your work network, maybe with a VPN when you work from home just to get onto Creo, this could be a potential solution to not have to worry about that for a specified amount of time. Another example might be an engineer going to China for several weeks at a time. Would be quite a hassle to have to connect to the work network every time they wanted to use Creo. So anytime working from home or offsite, this would be potentially very useful. So how this is done, it's very easy. Inside your program files on your computer, inside the Creo folder, there's a batch file that you can run. It's just one screen that you set some options and click OK, and that's most of the process right there. You can, as I mentioned, you can specify exactly how long you want this to last, and it will expire on midnight of the selected day. So it will be in use by your computer for that long, and at midnight it will go back to being available. All right, a couple considerations when doing this. First of all, you need to have a license available to borrow. This feature is only available with floating licenses. If you use a locked license for your computer, borrowing it is not something you're going to be doing. Related to this, the licenses that will be borrowed, it is done according to your Creo startup configuration. I will show you how to look at that in just a second. But essentially something to keep in mind, when you run Creo, it will do so according to a current configuration, and it will grab licenses, extensions, etc. at that point. And those are the licenses that are going to be borrowed every single time. So if you want to make sure you're borrowing certain licenses, then you need to check that startup configuration. Next thing to consider, there is a maximum number of days. By default, it is 0 to 5 days. Just something to note, that 0 option would just do same day, and it would expire midnight of the same night. This maximum duration is actually able to be extended though. I'll show you exactly how to do that. You just have to change one setting, but through that you can achieve a new maximum duration of either 29 days for perpetual licenses or 179 days, so almost 6 months for subscription licenses. Just a little note on those license types if you are unaware of the difference. Essentially, this is just a different way that PTC sells their licenses. They used to rely mostly on perpetual licenses. So a company would buy a certain number of licenses upfront and pay a fee, whereas they would own them forever and would only subscribe for maintenance services. And subscription licenses, which is the system PTC is mostly using nowadays, there's a lower upfront cost, and instead a company would just pay a subscription for maintenance and licenses both. So maybe as an effort to incentivize that, that's why you can do it longer with subscription licenses, but those are the maximum days you can borrow for. Last consideration you might want to think about is whether or not anyone else uses your licenses. So with floating licenses, a lot of the time, a company will have a certain number of floating licenses for a certain number of engineers, and those two won't be the same number, often because a lot of those engineers aren't always using Creo. So if you are a very frequent user and your company has a Creo seat allocated pretty much specifically for you, then you don't have anything to worry about. But if you're someone who's only on Creo maybe 15 minutes a day, and other people are going to be using that seat, just bear in mind that if you borrow the license, it will be locked to your computer for the duration. And you may want to make sure that you're not preventing somebody else from using that license to get onto Creo. Okay, with that, I'm going to go into a demonstration of how this works. All right. First thing to note, over here on my desktop, I have 2 license files. If you're not quite familiar with the licensing process, I'm not going to go too much into it. I did just want to make the point that every license file, there are 2 types of documents here. There's the license that shows standard at the end of the name, .txt, and the normal license file here. The main difference between these is with the standard license file, borrowing is actually not enabled. License borrowing is not enabled. Whereas with this license file that's not called standard, borrowing is enabled. A good way to check that, if you can't remember which is which, you can just go in here. I'm just going to do a quick find for borrow. And you can see it shows up in this license file. Compared to the standard one, doing that same search, cannot find. So that's just if you are someone that deals with license files, you do want to make sure that borrowing is enabled before you try this. So from here, I'm just going to go into my my hard drive here, into my program files, into the PTC folder, going into Creo, and then the parametric folder, and lastly, bin directory. In here, you can see that I have several batch files that are able to be run. The one that is related to borrowing, right here, parametric borrow.bat. So I'm going to go ahead and run that to show you all how it looks. And you'll see this window pops up. First of all, startup configurations. Currently only have one default. This will determine which licenses are actually being borrowed. Down here, license borrowing, the default is set to 1, but I can actually go down to 0 for only same day. And I can go up to 5 currently because I haven't changed any settings. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel out and go through some of those considerations with you all. First of all, I'm going to go to environment variables. So this is just a part of your Windows control panel. And I'm going to go in here and create a new variable called lm borrow duration. And I can set this variable to anything from 0 to 14. You'll notice that when I opened that batch file previously, the number of days was set to 1 by default. So if I enter, let's say 14, and hit OK, when I try that next time, the default's going to be 14. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open it up. You can see that 14 is the new default. But beyond that, I'm no longer capped at 5. I can go up higher. In my case, with a subscription license, up to 179 days maximum borrow time. You can see whatever that end date would be right there. So next consideration, I'm going to go ahead and open up the reconfigure menu for Creo here. This is very similar to the setup.exe that is run when initially installing Creo on your system for the first time. But this the difference is this reconfigure, it allows you to change some of those initial configuration settings without completely reinstalling Creo. Oh, so what I'm doing is I'm just going to go into the customize menu and go to command configuration. This is going to let me add or edit different startup configurations for Creo. You can see I only have one so far. It's listed as my defaults. And I'm just going to click edit here. And I can see my selected licenses on the right side here. So all of these startup extensions, floating options that are selected, all of these are licenses that I have that are going to be loaded when I open Creo, but also as a result of that, these are what are going to be borrowed when I go about and initiate that whole license borrowing process. If I wanted to change that, if I didn't want to borrow all of these, I would have to change it through this menu right here by selecting these, putting them to the other side, etc. Okay. And last thing to show, so a separate batch file in this same folder, PTC status. I'm going to go ahead and run that. This will actually show me all of my floating licenses that are free versus in use. you can see I have basically one copy of everything as free. That's good. This is what we want. Essentially, this just makes sure, as I mentioned, you need to have a license available to borrow before you can borrow it. As I can see, I have a free copy of every license. Again, you do need to consider if there are two people maybe that rely on this one license, if you borrow it, no one else will be able to use it. It will no longer be free. All right, with all of that being considered, I am going to go ahead and borrow my license. So I'm going to use this default startup configuration. My borrowing period, I'm going to do 0 days. I'm just going to borrow for the duration of today and start. Now this is just going to take just a second and load. And in just 1 second, we will see Creo parametric load up. Voila. Doesn't ask me for a new startup directory. I can just create a new folder. No big deal. And voila, we are into Creo. Now this license is actually borrowed. I'm operating with a license as part of my computer. So I'm just going to do a couple things to confirm that and show you all that that we're working properly. So first, I am going to disconnect from FlexNet license server. Essentially, I'm just disconnecting from my license server. This is just for demonstration purposes to show that these licenses are borrowed. For you, this could maybe consist of being able to still use Creo when you're not connected to your company's VPN or something. But essentially, I'm just disconnecting and showing you that Creo still works, as I said, for demonstration purposes. So I disconnected from FlexNet there, went into my services on my computer, found lmadmin, and stopped it. Looks like we got a little delay here. Sorry about that. There we go. All right, so now with that license server closed, or rather stopped, I'm going to go ahead and reopen Creo parametric. And if all goes well, I should still be able to open it up and do my work, completely disconnected from the server. And voila, here we are. Create a new part, and yeah, we're all good. One thing I can do, I'm gonna go ahead and run PTC status again. And now it actually says displaying borrow license for my computer name. You can see the expire date is set to tonight at midnight. And I'm completely disconnected from the license server, so you can see these are still showing up, still available. Pretty cool. And yeah, that's about it as far as license borrowing goes. I'm going to go ahead and open this up to questions if anybody has any. Let's see. Looks like we have a question. Does this mean I can have an engineer travel to Mexico for 2 weeks and just borrow a license? Yes. So it actually does. You can certainly do that if the considerations mentioned earlier are taken into account. No one else will be able to use that license for those 2 weeks while the employee is in Mexico. And of course, that duration would have to be extended past the default 5 days. But if those considerations are okay, then yeah, that's completely fine. He wouldn't have to worry about connecting to that server. I would maybe caution against going to Mexico for 2 weeks right now due to the virus that's going around. But if that's what he wants to do, he certainly could. It's okay in my book. All right, I'm gonna give it a couple seconds if anybody. All right, yep, looks like we have another one. 1 second. All right, question is, didn't see how I changed the default maximum days from 5 to 14. How did I get there? Okay, sure. So what I'm gonna do is I just went into my Windows search here and I typed environment variables. This is actually a part of the Windows control panel. I find it through search, but you can get there other ways, I'm sure, as well through the system properties. So this is just the window where you can see computer name, device manager, etc. So from here, you need to have administrator or admin access to make these changes, but you are able to set an environment variable for your computer or for your login profile on your computer. So this is what you're going to have to do if you want to change that default duration. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a new environment variable on for Boundary, which is my login account. Click new. The variable name, you may want to write this down if you foresee yourself needing it. So all caps LM underscore borrow underscore duration. Once that's entered, this variable name or variable value rather, you can set this from anywhere from 0 to 14. And it honestly doesn't really matter. It'll just change what the default is set to. But just the fact of setting this variable, the act of creating this environment variable will allow you to extend maximum days past 5. As mentioned previously, 14 is actually not really the max. If I set this to 14 and click OK, and then I go back in here, I can actually, the default is going to be 14, but I can actually go up to, in my case, 179, so almost 6 months. Just now that I set this environment variable, that capability is open. All right. Gonna give it just a second for any other questions. And otherwise, I hope you learned something today. Thank you so much for attending this Boundary webinar, and hope everybody has a great rest of the day. All right, looks like that's all the questions. Thanks, everybody.